Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping straight into, well, a really significant event. Palm Sunday. We've had requests to properly unpack the different gospel accounts, Luke, Matthew, and John, so that's what we're doing.
Sounds great.
Think of this as, getting to the heart of Jesus' entry into Jerusalem quickly, seeing what each writer emphasizes and, well, what it means.
Absolutely. And it's fascinating because you have these sources, the Gospels, and each gives a slightly different flavor, a different angle on the same core event.
Like looking at a sculpture from different sides.
Exactly. You get a much fuller picture that way.
Okay, let's dive right in then. The journey, the arrival in Jerusalem, Luke's account. He says Jesus is getting close, near Bethphage and Bethany, Mount of Olives.
That's right. And he sends two disciples, Luke doesn't name them, with this very specific task. Find a colt. Importantly, one that's never been ridden.
And the instruction, that's kind of specific too, isn't it? If anyone asks why they're taking it.
Just say, the Lord has need of it.
Yeah.
That's it.
What do you make of that? Just the Lord needs it. Full stop.
Well, it implies a couple of things, I think. Jesus' foreknowledge, for one. And this inherent authority. It's not really a request, more like a statement that carries weight.
And the unridden colt.
That often symbolizes something set apart for a special or sacred purpose, not used for common work.
Right. And Luke makes a point that Jesus rides this colt, which, as the sermon material highlighted, wasn't his usual way of getting around. He usually walked.
Yeah, that's a significant detail, a deliberate choice.
Then, coming down the Mount of Olives, Luke describes this big reaction. The whole multitude of his disciples starts praising God joyfully.
A big crowd of followers.
And they're shouting, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory in the highest." That's quite the welcome.
It really is. Luke, emphasizing the whole multitude of disciples, suggests this wasn't just a few people, but a significant groundswell of recognition, at least among his followers at that point.
They're calling him king.
Directly. Using language full of messianic hope, echoing the Old Testament.
But it wasn't universally popular, right? The Pharisees who were there, they object.
They do. They tell Jesus, basically, make your disciples be quiet.
And Jesus' reply is pretty striking. I tell you, if these were silent, the very stones would cry out.
It's powerful. It suggests this moment, this recognition, it was meant to happen. Almost like a cosmic inevitability, divine purpose unfolding.
Okay, so that's Luke's angle. Now let's switch to Matthew. He also starts at Bethphage, Mount of Olives, sends two unnamed disciples. But here's the difference.
Yes.
Matthew says they need to find a donkey tied and a colt with her.
Two animals.
Ah, yes, that's a key variation. And Matthew tells us exactly why.
The prophecy.
Exactly. Matthew explicitly quotes Zechariah 9:9, "Say to daughter Zion, see your king comes to you, gentle and riding on a donkey, and on a colt, the foal of a donkey."
So Matthew is really focused on showing the direct fulfillment of Scripture. Very much so. That seems to be a primary concern for him in this passage. He wants his readers to see Jesus ticking that prophetic box, so to speak.
And Matthew says the disciples brought both animals, put cloaks on them, plural, and Jesus sat on them, sitting on both. How does that work?
It's a unique detail to Matthew, and honestly, a bit awkward to picture literally. Some think it's Matthew's way of emphatically linking Jesus to both parts of the prophecy, the donkey and the colt. A sort of literary emphasis.
Interesting. Matthew also has the crowd spreading cloaks on the road, like Luke, but also cutting branches, though not necessarily palm branches specified here.
Right, just branches from the trees in Matthew's account.
And the shouting is slightly different too. Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest.
Son of David, that's huge.
Why specifically that title?
It's a direct messianic title, linking Jesus straight to King David's royal line, which was where the anticipated Messiah was expected to come from. So the crowd in Matthew is explicitly acknowledging that lineage.
Got it. And Matthew adds this detail. When Jesus enters Jerusalem itself, the whole city was stirred up asking, "Who is this?"
Yeah, that's interesting. The whole city buzzing.
And the crowds, maybe different people from the initial disciples, answer, "This is Jesus, the prophet from Nazareth of Galilee." Prophet, not king or son of David here.
That's a really sharp observation. It might suggest that while his immediate followers were using messianic titles, the broader population in the city itself maybe saw him more as a significant prophet, perhaps. There's a bit more ambiguity in the citywide reaction in Matthew.
Okay, now John. His account has some unique markers too. He sets it the next day after Jesus had been at a feast nearby.
Right, a timing detail the others don't give.
And it's a large crowd, specifically those who had come for the festival, who hear Jesus is on his way.
Mm-hmm.
And they take branches of palm trees, there they are, and go out to meet him.
Finally, the palms. Yes, John is the one who specifies palm branches, which is, of course, what we call it Palm Sunday.
And these are symbols of all
Triumph, victory, even royalty in that culture. A very deliberate symbol for them to use.
And their cry is, again, slightly different. Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the King of Israel.
King of Israel. Very direct. John connects the royal expectation explicitly to their national identity.
Now, in John's telling, how does Jesus get the animal?
It's a bit different. John simply says Jesus found a young donkey and sat on it. The disciples' role in fetching it isn't mentioned here.
Why the difference, do you think?
Well, perhaps John wants to emphasize Jesus' own initiative, his deliberate action in fulfilling the prophecy, which John also quotes right after. Do not be afraid, daughter Zion. See, your king is coming, seated on a donkey's colt.
It highlights Jesus' agency.
That makes sense. And John adds a fascinating bit of commentary.
About the disciples.
Yeah, he says they didn't understand all this at the time. It only clicked later, after Jesus was glorified. Right. John's writing with hindsight, looking back after the resurrection and ascension. He can insert that clarification, that the full significance wasn't obvious in the moment, even to those closest to Jesus.
And John gives a very specific reason why this crowd was so enthusiastic.
Lazarus.
Exactly. They came out because they'd heard he'd raised Lazarus from the dead. That miracle was fresh in people's minds.
Which, of course, directly leads to the reaction of the Pharisees in John's account.
Yes, tell us about that.
John gives us their private reaction.
Yeah.
See, this is getting us nowhere. Look how the whole world has gone after him. It reveals their motive jealousy, fear of losing control, losing influence, because Jesus is becoming so popular, especially after Lazarus.
So pulling these threads together, we have Luke focusing on the disciples' praise and the inevitability, Matthew on prophecy fulfillment and the city's mixed reaction, and John on the palm branches, the Lazarus connection, and the leader's opposition.
Yeah, it's not that they contradict each other. It's more like they complement. Each writer has a slightly different focus, maybe a different audience in mind, and highlights different facets of the same complex event.
You get a richer picture seeing all three.
Definitely.
Now, the sermon source we reviewed really dug into the symbolism, the donkey specifically.
Right. It's central.
It contrasts Jesus, humble on a donkey, with, say, a conquering general. The sermon mentioned Genghis Khan, Caesar who would ride a war horse.
Absolutely. The donkey was a symbol of peace, humility, domesticity, not military aggression. Jesus is deliberately choosing to present himself as a king of peace, not a warrior king.
The Prince of Peace entering Jerusalem, the city of peace.
Precisely. The symbolism is very intentional.
Okay. And the crowd's actions, spreading cloaks, the branches, and shouting, Hosanna! What exactly does Hosanna mean? We hear it a lot.
It's Hebrew, and it literally means something like save please, or save us now.
So it's a plea.
Originally, yes, it's a cry for deliverance, for salvation. In this context, though, it seems to function as both that plea and a shout of praise and welcome. Like, salvation has come, here he is. It's directly linked to Psalm 118, which was associated with messianic hope.
Which brings us to what people expected him to save them from. This seems to be a key point.
A very key point.
The sermon drew that parallel to Old Testament Israel, asking for a king like the other nations, wanting a political or military figure.
Yes, and often missing the kind of leader God was actually providing.
And it poses that really direct question to us, the listeners. What do we want Jesus to save us from? Are our expectations sometimes, misplaced? More about fixing our immediate problems than about deeper spiritual transformation?
It's a challenging question. It forces us to examine our own motives. Were the crowd shouting Hosanna, hoping for Roman overthrow, for earthly power? And do we sometimes do the same, wanting Jesus to fit our agenda?
Yeah. And we have to remember the timing of all this. This whole triumphant entry, it's the start of the end, isn't it?
It is. It's the beginning of Holy Week, or Passion Week. Jesus is walking knowingly towards immense suffering and death. The sermon called it his greatest fight.
So there's this incredible tension, outward celebration, palm branches, hosannas.
But Jesus knows the cross is just days away. The contrast is stark. He's not riding in unaware. It's a deliberate, courageous act.
The sermon also mentioned what happens soon after Jesus going into the temple.
Right, the cleansing of the temple, which stands in contrast to maybe earlier visits. He confronts the money changers, the sellers.
Finding a royal mess, as the sermon put it.
Yeah. He asserts his authority, declaring it should be a house of prayer, not commerce. And the sermon drew a powerful connection there.
Between the physical temple and
our hearts. That our hearts are the true temple Jesus wants to enter and cleanse, to make a place of genuine worship.
So if we were to sort of distill the key takeaways from the sermon and these accounts, what stands out?
Well, first, the entry is fundamentally an invitation. An invitation for everyone, then and now, to recognize Jesus as the true king, not just historically, but personally, king of your heart.
And that true worship, true recognition isn't just about the outward stuff, the singing or, the palm branches.
Exactly. It's about inner surrender, giving him our lives, our agendas. The internal disposition matters more than the external display.
Okay, and the donkey.
A constant reminder of his nature, humble, peaceful, the Prince of Peace, bringing a different kind of kingdom.
And the potential misunderstanding of the crowd, that's a mirror for us.
It really can be. Our tendency to have maybe carnal or worldly expectations of Jesus, wanting him to fix things on our terms, potentially missing his deeper purpose of spiritual salvation and transformation.
It's easy to project our own desires onto him.
Very easy. It requires constant reflection to align ourselves with his actual mission.
So wrapping up this deep dive, Palm Sunday. It looks like a triumph, but it's layered with meaning about who Jesus is, what his kingdom is like, and frankly, about us and our own hearts.
Beautifully put. It sets the stage for everything that follows in Holy Week, but it's profound in its own right.
And the sermon left us with that final, really provocative thought.
The question, yeah.
What will you do when Jesus rides into your life? Will you accept and crown him, or will you deny and kill him? Metaphorically speaking, of course, in terms of our response.
It's a stark choice. It forces you to consider your own response beyond just intellectual understanding. Will you truly make him king of your life?
Definitely something to reflect on. This look at Palm Sunday through the different Gospels, using the sermon's insights, really does give you a lot to think about.
It does. And hopefully it encourages listeners to go back to Luke, Matthew, and John themselves and keep exploring.
Absolutely. Thanks for digging into this with us.